Thank you, thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
Like, I was eating Popeye's chicken the other day. Based on the leg size, I estimate a Popeye's chicken stands about 4'7". These are not normal chickens. These are Danny DeVito-sized monsters. Like, if you go to the slaughterhouse where they kill the Popeye's chickens, it's like a fair fight. We've lost a lot of good men on that floor. It's tough.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Bad News Thursday, August the 22nd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, and a little bit of something from Stu Varney, we will have the shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and Bad News. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
We're living in a country that's the finest place on earth. But some folks don't appreciate this land that gave them birth. I hear that up in Washington they're having an awful fuss, 'cause communists and spies are making monkeys out of us. The bureaus and departments have been busy night and day. They're figuring out just how we gave our secrets all away. And Congress has appointed a committee, so they said, to find out who's American and who's a low-down red. They called him up to Washington to speak for Uncle Sam. But when they asked them what they are, they shut up like a clam. I wish they'd take and put me on the witness stand today. I'd shout so loud old Stalin could hear me all the way. I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own. Our government is bigger than it ever was today. The more they hire to work for it, the more they have to pay. Our public servants should be proud and honest, you would think, instead of taking bribes and dressing up their wives and me. The taxes keep on going up, of that there is no doubt. But still they just can't take it in as fast as they dish it out. Our national debt is monster size and growing every day. Our children's children still unborn are gonna have to pay. Our dollar used to be the soundest money on this earth, but now $2 won't even buy one good dollar's worth. Unless we stop inflation and take care of what we've got, the communists may win the fight and never fire a shot. Oh, I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own.
Thank you. And now, Stuart Barney.
Morning, a great show. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a great Thursday. Varney Company picks it up right now. Stu, take it away.
You're right, Maria. Who is running the country?
Yeah.
And good morning to you. Good morning, everyone. Tonight, the main event. Kamala Harris makes the political speech of her life. We're told she will discuss her middle-class upbringing, the evil past versus the hopeful future, and patriotism. Wednesday night, Governor Walz staked his claim as Harris's running mate. He made false claims about Trump and GOP policy. But you know, it was Oprah Winfrey, I think, stole the show. It was a well-delivered speech about a principle, but not about policy. The crowd loved it. This morning on Fox, Trump replied. He denounced Harris as a radical left lunatic and linked her to the ruin of San Francisco. All right, that's dealing with politics. Now let's get to the money. It is widely assumed that the Federal Reserve will soon lower interest rates. That's baked into the market. Yep, the rally continues. Dow up maybe another 50, NASDAQ up about 70 points in the early going this morning. Bitcoin has moved above $60,000 a coin, 60,800. Interest rates holding at lower levels. The 10-year Treasury is just above the 380 level, 382 at the moment. And the 2-year, 397 is the yield right there, below 4%. Gold remains close to record levels, 25.36. Oil moving up very slightly, just a couple of cents, in response to Israeli action against Hezbollah overnight. Gas continues to retreat, a gallon of regular down a penny at 3.38, and diesel, same story, down a penny at 3.72. On the show today, Hamas wanted to turn Chicago 2024 into Chicago 1968. So far, they have failed. The turnout has been low. The demonstrators have had little impact on the convention. In fact, it's turned into farce. Listen to this. The FBI is investigating the alleged contamination of a Democrat breakfast buffet with maggots. Childish and juvenile. Thursday, August the 22nd, 2024. Varney and Company is about to begin.
And that was Varney and Company. Goodbye, Stu. Thank you. And now a little bit of Robert Reich. In the years after Trump's tax cuts, S&P 500 corporations spent $2.72 trillion on stock buybacks to enrich wealthy shareholders. That's more than what they spent on investments in plants and technology to boost production and create jobs. That's right, Mr. Reich, and there's nothing you can do about it because you have no authority, no power, and you can't win. One thing I also want to say about this is, well, two things. First of all, what he's trying to do here is he states facts, or things we can assume are facts. They sound reasonable. It's basically he's making an arbitrary claim. He doesn't say where he gets his information, but we can just, for the sake of argument, assume that it's a fact that they spent $2.72 trillion on stock buybacks to enrich wealthy shareholders. The answer to that is, so what? Who cares? Right? There's nothing illegal, there's nothing immoral, there's nothing unethical. It's a fact. But what they like to do is use tone of voice to make it sound like there's an accusation in there. They'll write it or say it in such a way to make it sound like an accusation, and then the would-be conservatives they'll panic and start to think that they have to defend something, that they've got to come out and defend Donald Trump's tax cuts somehow. No, you don't, because all this guy's doing is stating the facts. That's why I come back and I say, that's right, and there's nothing you can do about it. And now what we've done here is also change the subject from tax cuts to power and the lack of power that Robert Reich has. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the military shorts.
Born weighing only 3 pounds, she was given the nickname Tiny, which stuck for life. Her name was Georgia Tiny Broadwick, and on June 21, 1913, she became the first woman to jump from an airplane when she descended from a Martin T plane 2,000 feet over Los Angeles. Tiny was suspended from a trap seat behind the wing with the parachute on a shelf above her, which opened automatically from a string attached to the plane. At the onset of World War I, the Army asked Tiny to demonstrate jumping from a military plane. She did 3 successful jumps, but on the 4th, her static line got tangled in the tail. Thinking quickly, Tiny cut the line and plummeted to earth, pulling the small remaining line and opening the parachute. She had just demonstrated the first ripcord, and it showed that backpack parachutes were possible. Her innovation would go on to save thousands of lives during both world wars and change aviation forever.
And that was the patriotic short. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
Sometimes you got to take a break from just about everything, disappear, come back, and shock the world. I'm talking to that athlete. I'm talking to that administrator. I'm talking to that nurse, that doctor. I'm talking to that student. I'm talking to that communicator. I'm talking to that pioneer, that inventor. I'm talking to that entrepreneur. I'm talking to that preacher. I'm talking to that person who refuses to stay where they are. I'm talking to that person that doesn't have a problem laying in obscurity, because you know that when you come out of the dark room, all eyes on you. We live in a culture of busyness, distraction, and noise. And sometimes the only way something's going to change is if we disappear. Sometimes you got to delete the app. Sometimes you have to walk away. Sometimes you have to fall back into the dark room and focus on you. Everybody wants destiny. Everybody wants manifestation. Everybody wants fulfillment. Everybody wants the next level in the relationship and a higher quality of living. But nobody wants to eliminate distractions. Nobody wants to disappear for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and get into a place where you can focus on just you. What if you could just shut out every distraction? What if you could just shut out the world for just a season and focus on you? A man is rewarded in public for what he does in private. Can you unplug for just a moment and focus on you? Focus on what matters. Why are you here? What is your destiny? The reason why you don't see it, the reason why it has not manifested, the reason why you are so frustrated is because you have not been willing to forsake all that you've been called to forsake and to follow through behind closed doors. Sure, you can talk about it. Sure, you can plan it. Sure, you can write it down. Sure, you can go to the conference and hear about it. You can read about it. But at some juncture, you have to disappear and put the work in and come back and shock everybody that doubted you. I'm talking to that man, that woman, that boy, that girl who feels the fire in their belly. It's time for you to shock the world. You may have to sleep in your car. You may have to go without food. You may have to bounce around from couch to couch. You may have to sacrifice like nobody in your family ever has. But can you do it behind the scenes when nobody's looking, when nobody's watching, when nobody understands the measure of passion that you carry? Can you keep going? Don't stop. You're right there. Go through the process in the dark room that prepares us and equips us for the stages of destiny.
It's time to get real. It's time to get raw. It's time to look ourselves in the mirror and come to the resolve that this version of ourself is not going to carry us in the stretch. That I've been this version of myself long enough that if I don't change, if I don't do something about this, then I'm going to find myself bankrupt.
Some of the most monumental and transformational portraits and pictures that we've ever seen were developed in the dark room. We celebrate athletes and we celebrate critical thinkers and innovators and actors, and we praise them and coin them our heroes, and we follow them by the millions. We love what they do in public, but you don't know the story behind the glory. You don't know the blood, the sweat. You didn't see the tears that they cried, the prayers that they prayed, the countless weeks where they went without sleep to get where they are. One of the greatest tragedies in life is to live and not know why you're living. I'm just wondering if there's anybody here that wants their future, that wants to fulfill their destiny, that wants to manifest, that wants to walk in discipline and determination. I'm just wondering, is there anybody here that's willing to disappear? Are you willing to forsake all distractions? Can you hide yourself in the library? Can you hide yourself in the gym? Can you hide yourself in the boardroom and plan and caucus and do what is required behind the scenes in order to manifest the moment? Can you hide yourself in your books? Can you hide yourself in your closet? Can you hide yourself in the prayer rooms? Can you hide yourself? We have this passion to be in the public eye, but no patience to do the work behind the scenes. Stop telling the world what you are about to do. Steve Jobs once said, "We do not say anything about future products. We work on them in secret, and then we release them to the world." We only have so much real estate in our minds and our hearts. We only have so much bandwidth in our mental capacity. And the more distractions, the more delusions, the more negativity that we allow to take up real estate in our hearts and in our minds, the less energy we have to fulfill the call, to fulfill destiny, to manifest the idea. Everything that you think about, that you meditate on, everything that has to your attention has to be worth your time. So now it's time to navigate and do an appraisal of everything that's in our life, everything and everybody in our life. Time to do an appraisal and ask them this question: are you worth my time? If you're not, it's time to unplug. Time to unplug. Time to unplug. I'm just wondering if there's anybody that can hear my voice right now that has come to the end of themselves and they are willing to eliminate distractions. They are willing to delete social media apps if they have to. They are willing to walk away from everything that is distracted, everything that has diluted your devotion and your determination, every disease and dysfunction and disorder that has pulled you from destiny after you have heard it, after you have received it, after you have written it down, after you have spoken it once. Do what is required to manifest it into reality. If you can see it in your head, you can hold it in your hand. Stop telling everybody what you're going to do. Stop telling everybody what your next move is, and just disappear and do the work that is required. Don't be bitter. Don't be frustrated. Listen, just remain faithful behind the scenes. Promotion is coming. Stages and opportunities are being prepared right now as you sacrifice in secret, as you put the work in the dark room, as you do what is required to hold in your hand what you see in your head.
When no one is there to affirm you, when nobody's there to validate you, when nobody is there to agree with you, you build in the dark and you announce it when it's finished.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Daily Stoic.
Only bad dreams. Clear your mind and get a hold on yourself. And as when awakened from sleep and realizing it was only a bad dream upsetting you, wake up and see that what's there is just like those dreams. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations 6.31. The author Raymond Chandler was describing most of us when he wrote in a letter to his publisher, "I never looked back, although I had many uneasy periods looking forward." Thomas Jefferson once joked in a letter to John Adams, "How much pain have cost us the evils which have never happened." And Seneca would put it best, "There is nothing so certain in our fears that's not yet more certain in the fact that most of what we dread comes to nothing." Many of the things that upset us, the Stoics believed, are a product of the imagination, not reality. Like dreams, they are vivid and realistic at the time, but preposterous once we come out of it. In a dream, we never stop to think and say, "Does this make any sense?" No, we go along with it. The same goes with our flights of anger or fear or other extreme emotions. Getting upset is like continuing the dream while you're awake. The thing that provoked you wasn't real, but your reaction was. And so from the fake comes real consequences. Which is why you need to wake up right now instead of creating a nightmare.
And that was the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
There's only one real sadness in life, not to be a saint. There's only one sadness. You say, "Oh gosh, I'm sad because I didn't achieve this goal. I didn't get the money I wanted, didn't get the career I wanted, didn't get the wife or husband I wanted." Well, okay, but those aren't real sadnesses. The only real sadness is not to be the person God wanted you to be. If you let that become the governing principle of your life, everything will change.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "Capitalism and altruism are incompatible. They are philosophical opposites. They cannot coexist in the same man or in the same society." Unquote. Ayn Rand, for the new intellectual, from the book For the New Intellectual. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 Strategies of War.
From Human, All Too Human, by Friedrich Nietzsche. To attack or to intervene. We often make the mistake of actively opposing a tendency or party or age because we happen to have seen only its external side, its deliquescence, or the faults of its virtues necessarily adhering to it. Perhaps because we ourselves have participated in them to a marked degree. Then we turn our back on them and go off in an opposite direction. But it would be better if we sought out their good and strong side instead, or evolved and developed it in ourselves. It requires, to be sure, a more penetrating eye and a more favorable inclination to advance what is imperfect and evolving than to see through it in its imperfection and deny it. And lastly, by Niccolo Machiavelli. A prince need trouble little about conspiracies when the people are well disposed. But when they are hostile and hold him in hatred, then he must fear everything and everybody.
And that was the end of Chapter 31, Destroy from Within, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. So if you're a Democrat, you should vote Republican because there are things that don't disappear. Violence is one of them. Modernity is not distinguished by an aversion to violence. Violence is simply protean. It varies its outward form according to the social constellation at hand. Today, it is shifting from the visible to the invisible, from the frontal to the viral, from brute force to mediated force, from the real to the virtual, from the physical to the psychological, from the negative to the positive, withdrawing into the subcutaneous, subcommunicative, capillary, and neuronal space, creating the false impression that it has disappeared. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 5 of the book Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy, A Digital Revolution.
Chapter 5, A Digital Revolution. In the infancy of the Internet, it was impossible not to think it would be a democratizing force. Decentralized, essentially free, and open to all, the Internet was expected to herald in a new kind of journalism. We already know this didn't happen. The Internet's failures to make us more empathetic and better informed, and its ripeness for capture by despotic forces have at this point been chronicled at length. Instead of a shared, infinitely expanding base of knowledge shored up from disparate corners of the globe, the Internet created information bubbles and echo chambers with bespoke narratives that crowd out any facts that might challenge these formations, ultimately limiting rather than expanding our horizons. And when it comes to legacy journalism, the Internet has had the opposite effect of the democratizing one it seemed to promise. But despite what we are often told, today's crisis in American journalism is not one of partisanship. There was a time, as we saw in Chapter 1, when the media was also deeply partisan, but the most successful journalists used that partisanship as a cudgel against the powerful in a crusade for the powerless. The problem with today's media is not that it is partisan, but who it is partisan for, and who has been left without a partisan press, or anyone else for that matter, pushing their interests. One can only imagine what someone like Pulitzer or Day would have done with the Internet. But rather than use our new technology as an opportunity to revive the kind of populist journalism the fathers of the penny press believed in, about and for the working class and the poor, publishers have by and large used it to the opposite effect, compounding with journalists' own newfound elitism to further narrow the question of who their journalism exists to represent. It turns out that digital media is the perfect tool for elite journalists to use to drill down on their subjects and for further abandoning the working class in favor of a culture war around identity that benefits the elites. It's true that the internet has given some readers more of a voice by upending a top-down model of journalism. Before the 2010s, publishers had a captive audience of readers and viewers, and they were paid by advertisers whose products readers were exposed to every time they opened their morning paper or turned on the TV. Moreover, the incentives of advertisers and publishers were aligned, writes Ben Thompson, author of a digital media newsletter and podcast called Stratechery. Publishers employed journalists whose goal it was to reach as many of the right readers as possible, and they were paid by advertisers who wanted the same thing. This also meant that journalists could toil pretty much independently of the business end of things. With things like the price of the paper, the house style, and the beats a publication covered signaling to readers and advertisers who the paper was meant for, once the publishers gained readers, they had a monopoly on their attention. Journalists didn't really have to pay much mind to keeping readers or viewers. And they didn't. Mostly they were concerned with impressing one another. But the internet changed the relationship between the business and the editorial sides of journalism. For starters, because the cost of starting a publication was now zero, there was also a potentially unlimited amount of competition for readers' attention. When this became clear to advertisers, the price of online ads plummeted. If at one time an ad in the New York Times was competing with an ad in the Washington Post for the guaranteed attention of a group of people who had been painstakingly cultivated for their purchasing power by publishing the right kind of articles, an ad on the website of the New York Times was now competing with the entire universe for the attention of literally everyone. On the internet, at least for a while, no one knew you were poor. So while major publications were getting a lot of readers in the early days of digital publishing, this ironically reduced the amount of money they were bringing in for digital ads because they'd lost the ability to convince their advertisers that the people seeing these ads were potential customers. If anyone can see your Patek Philippe ad online, that ad is virtually worthless. What this meant was that the incentives of publishers to get as many readers as possible and the incentives of advertisers to pay for only the right kind of readers were now at odds with each other, when they had been in lockstep for the better part of a century. Publishers needed to find a new way to make money, fast. They needed to get people to look at their content when literally the entire world was competing for the attention of readers. Publications began to adapt. The Washington Post, purchased in 2013 by Amazon founder and billionaire Jeff Bezos, built up what it called the customer engagement funnel. Using social media to share articles about topics already trending on Twitter and YouTube with catchy headlines that pique the reader's interest by withholding crucial information. The Post drives readers to its website where they find a host of other engaging content, algorithmically organized to keep them on the site and scrolling down the funnel to ever more stories. The use of headlines with a curiosity gap to draw in readers is now a widely deployed tool of digital media. Recall, for instance, this gem from CNN's Twitter feed in 2014. 14-year-old girl stabbed her little sister 40 times, police say. The reason why will shock you. Another tool is targeted advertising. Here's how it works. A Silicon Valley company like Facebook or Google or Twitter grows its user base as fast as possible by creating a free app or website that users like spending time on. The time spent is known as engagement, and it allows the company to collect data about users as it goes about courting them and keeping them on the site. It learns about users' online habits, what they click on and when, what they are likely to buy, where they live, who their friends are, and most crucially, how much money they make. The company can then make money off this information by tailoring its ads to specific demographics, just like Henry Raymond and Adolph Ochs and Harold Ross did. By knowing who its users are, it can sell them an ad specifically designed to interest them, charging advertisers for bringing them people more likely to become customers. And because the companies track your movements on their sites, they can often predict what your next move will be, making the sites even more appealing to advertisers. The biggest companies with the most data can then sell that data to other smaller companies, which can then use it to sell you even more online ads. Engagement became key, both for collecting more data and for showing more ads. And it changed more than just the headlines. If your goal has shifted from getting someone to purchase a paper at a newsstand to getting them to stay on your website as long as possible, you will try to accomplish this through every means at your disposal. You will publish different kinds of articles from the get-go, articles that create a user engagement funnel, that make the reader feel a sense of urgency about staying on the site. And it's no longer just cable news that's trying to get you to keep from changing the channel by teasing an ever more extreme news segment after the break. Every online news publication is now doing this too. Because the most extreme members of your audience are usually the ones who are the most engaged, they are now the viewers and readers being catered to most assiduously. It soon became clear that though the future of journalism was online, digital ads would always bring in just a fraction of the money that print ads had. So major media outlets pivoted. They turned to digital subscriptions for the bulk of their revenue and then to memberships, where the perks involved empowering readers, well, the right readers, and giving them a say, or what the New York Times called a two-way relationship with readers, so they can engage with our journalism and our journalists. But readers had a say in a different way too. Media companies began to meticulously track how well different stories were performing with different audiences and which stories were getting the most traction, so that journalists could produce more of those kinds of stories for the right audience. It's had an amplifying effect on a certain kind of story, the kind that travels well on social media. Social media platforms became essential to journalists trying to get their articles read, both for reporters at traditional media companies and perhaps even more so for those working at new digitally native media companies. In 2015, for the first time, digital media jobs were being added at a number that outpaced the number of jobs being lost in traditional media, with the rate of jobs being added nearly doubling those lost. But it's important to understand that digital media is a different beast. Most digital media jobs are not reporting jobs. At many of these companies, quantity is the key to driving traffic, which means that instead of teaching young entry-level journalists how to report a story, how to find sources, how to set up a story, and how to make sure they come to the story with fresh eyes and a willingness to learn from what they find, all while challenging their own preconceived notions and letting the evidence speak for itself, many digital media jobs now simply require young journalists to aggregate stories from other major news organizations. Many outlets demand 3, 5, or even 10 stories a day, and some even pay writers according to the amount of clicks their stories get. What this means is that there is a new generation of young journalists who have never truly gone out and reported a story. In fact, there is a huge incentive not to do any reporting at all because success is judged by how much traffic their stories generate, and that traffic comes from social media, where people only like to read what confirms their pre-existing beliefs. There is immense pressure to write stories in a way that will make them most likely to be shared on social media and retweeted by bigger names across industries, meaning there is immense pressure to confirm the biases of a publication's readership. Of course, it's no crime for a journalist to want to see their stories shared and talked about. But when this is the sole measure of a story's quality, the type of story that's being generated quickly devolves. And it's here that we see a real break from the way the craft was shaped by the pressures of the industry of a bygone era. The pipeline that got people from high school to the national press has become much more of a monoculture, Connor Friedersdorf, a longtime Atlantic reporter, explained to me. As he pointed out, it used to be that to wind up at the New York Times, you'd get your start from a regional newspaper. And that meant that you were in this local hierarchy that was probably owned by a relatively conservative newspaper owner, and you had probably a city editor who had been there for a long time and who was more likely to be working class. You were also consuming regional publications or very different publications from other people. And then you would wind up maybe at the New York Times one day. Now it's very different. Almost no one is going the newspaper route anymore, which also means they're not doing on-the-ground reporting, which in itself is important. You just find things you don't expect. And once you arrive, the youngest cohort of journalists have all been reading all the same things since they were in college because we've moved to a national ecosystem where everything is online. Far from replacing print journalism jobs, many digital media jobs involve little journalism at all, and they favor the young. Digital media jobs, along with the rise of social media platforms like Twitter, have given digital natives a leg up in a crumbling industry. Peter Hamby exposed what was nothing short of a generational replacement of campaign journalists in the age of Twitter in his 2013 paper, Did Twitter Kill the Boys on the Bus? Searching for a Better Way to Cover a Campaign. Campaign journalism used to be the aspiration of every journalist, the pinnacle of the profession, where only the most experienced journalists could hope to arrive when they were at the top of their game. But the cliquey, cynical, wizened pros described in Timothy Krause's book, The Boys on the Bus, have been replaced by a cohort that is young, inexperienced, and angry, as one of Mitt Romney's top advisors told Hamby. A 33-year-old reporter was one of the oldest assigned to the Romney campaign. Twitter is no longer just where the news is discussed. It's become the place the news is made, which has given young reporters another big advantage over their older, more experienced colleagues. As Hamby explained it, in 2008, shortly after Twitter's launch, younger reporters in Washington were rushing to sign up, partly as a way to find news and information faster than their older colleagues in the business. The service also offered a way for up-and-coming reporters to push their stories and reporting into the Washington bloodstream, bypassing the traditional pathways up the Beltway media ladder and enhancing their personal brands in the process. It's much harder to come at every story with an open mind if you see your job as burnishing your personal brand. Brands are based on consistency, whereas reporting is meant to be about finding things that are new, even if they don't comport with your expectations. But it wasn't just digital media companies that leaned into the poisonous effects of Twitter. Everyone embraced it, including the leadership of the New York Times. We need to help journalists raise their profiles on social by sharing best practices, read a leaked report from 2014. Of course, if a news media company is relying on social media to distribute its content, that grants social media users a huge amount of leverage over what gets published and how. The barriers between consumer and producer have become more porous with every passing year, and it's changed the news in a major way. Perhaps even more powerful than the desire for online adulation is the desire to avoid online censure, which can be extreme for reporters uncovering uncomfortable facts that their followers don't particularly wish to be informed of. Many wrongly cast this as a democratization of the news. It's not. Less than a quarter of Americans use Twitter, and these users tend to be younger, wealthier, and more educated than the nation at large. But if Twitter hasn't democratized the news, it has certainly made internet fame more available to more journalists, provided they can supply the kind of content that Twitter rewards with likes and retweets. It's impossible to overstate how deeply the back and forth between Twitter and the news has influenced the journalism industry. The site plays a significant role in how journalists now gather news, acting the way that wire services once did as a constantly updated source of information. But that same place where journalists go to gather news is a place where users can talk back to them, and talk they do, in swarms and mobs that have on many, many occasions forced even august institutions like the New York Times to edit itself to suit the demands of the Twitterati. In the 1990s, cable news taught a few select broadcast journalists to see themselves as characters in their stories. Journalists like Mike Wallace cast themselves in the narratives they crafted for TV segments, while politicians began to see themselves through the lens of the camera. Television has thus expropriated their personalities and made them into something like television shadows of their former selves, a Czech president once aptly put it in a Harvard commencement speech. Something similar is happening on social media, where journalists cast themselves as the stars of a Manichaean drama, a process very much rewarded by an industry that measures success in terms of buzz, clicks, and attention. The spectacle created by this exposes the double-edged sword of 21st century journalism. On the one hand, journalism as an industry has imploded. On the other hand, this status revolution that turned journalists from working class to upper middle class, turned a few at the top into celebrities in their own right, and granted a much larger class the ersatz celebrity of our age, internet fame. Journalism today is a strange amalgam of prestige and desperation, glory and renown fermented by anguish and despair. And this strange phenomenon, the success of celebrity leavened by the gnawing threat of oblivion, has filled the industry with hot air. Journalists are increasingly focused on themselves. Even as the industry has radically constricted, journalism has become star-oriented, as James Fallows once put it, which makes sense. With the industry a third of the size it once was, each journalist represents a greater share of the industry as a whole, and thus gets a greater share of the public's attention. Social media offers them a lower grade but still fulfilling form of attention and renown among their peers and the activists and politicians who haunt the same platforms. And the censure is extreme for those who don't obey the dictates of Twitter. Ruthless dogpiling, embarrassing revelations, doxing, and days of abuse. If the internet was supposed to make journalism ever more diverse, Twitter has ensured it's had the opposite effect. The groupthink in terms of journalists, the psychology of Twitter is a huge piece of it, a journalist who works at a public radio station told me. He explained, I have to check myself. I get the serotonin like everybody does from the retweets, from the likes, from the attaboys. I have to be extremely cognizant of what's happening in my brain. If I write this tweet this way, I'm going to get more retweets. Not necessarily because it's more accurate, but because the people who are following me because of what I cover are on the left of this issue. And there's no training or guidance or conversation about the fact that you need to be aware of that. It's clear by now that all too many journalists are just not up to the task of policing themselves. Of course, right-wing media has its own version of this. Outlets like Breitbart and the One America News Network, or OAN, have flourished in the digital age, harnessing the same tools to provide conspiratorial and sometimes racist commentary to legions of right-wing and alt-right readers, though the biggest conservative juggernaut, Fox News, caters mostly to older audiences who are less engaged in digital culture. But social media hasn't just sacrificed the quality of journalism on the altar of the egotism of individual journalists. It's proven problematic for major media companies as well, not least because it is Facebook and Google that are making most of the money off of the journalists' content. And the model where digital media companies offered free content in an effort to court readers and have their offerings go viral resulted in an unsustainable situation of too many publications trying to be everything to everyone, diluting brands and content as they went. Take BuzzFeed, once the hope for digital media. Its business model originally relied on banner ads, affiliate marketing, selling merchandise, and native advertising. Ads that were structured like the articles on the site and were even written by journalists, but were still created for a specific company. For example, an ad for PetSmart called The 12 Most Embarrassing Pethood Moments. These ads were interspersed with the free content, listicles, and quizzes that readers shared on social media platforms like Facebook and that often went viral. BuzzFeed wasn't just selling these brands a single ad on the site. It was sharing with them the secrets it had learned about going viral, the knowledge of what works on social media, which it had learned through thousands of iterations. As Thompson puts it on Stratechery, the company sells its ability to grok and shape what works on social to brands. BuzzFeed went viral again and again by hacking into the minds of its readers, college-educated urban millennials sitting at desks in front of computers at information-age jobs with time on their hands and a desire to broadcast a little bit about themselves, a little bit of their own quirky sense of humor that turned out to be a sense of humor shared by millions of other college-educated urban millennials. BuzzFeed founder Jonah Peretti's team of highly educated millennials who went to Yale and Vassar and NYU and St. John's University knew how to think like their peers, knew what personal buttons to press to make them share something. BuzzFeed learned how to listen to the tides of the internet. It found its beating heart, and in learning how to listen for the approaching drumbeat of viral content, it learned how to make content too enticing not to share. We organized the site around the emotions that lead to sharing, Peretti told Columbia Journalism Review in 2013. If a football player does a funny touchdown dance, you share the video because it is funny, not because it is sports. Every day on the internet was a popularity contest, and every day BuzzFeed could win it with the right tactics. For example, publishing an article with 15 different headlines, tracking them all to see which one was able to lure the most readers to the site, then replacing them all with the winner, knowing it would bring in the most traffic. And these tactics worked on the native ads too, which could be made to go just as viral. For a long time, Peretti insisted that BuzzFeed was not a journalistic site. But then it began publishing investigative journalism, which made the claim a bit harder to sustain. Companies decoding the key to what traveled on social media created something of a disastrous feedback loop, where Facebook still controlled digital media companies' traffic and thus revenue, a lane it could narrow at will, and that was amplified by people's social media spheres, which were already constricting to reflect their political preferences and their eagerness to share things with an ever narrower portion of the population. When Facebook turned off the spigot, publications had to try that much harder to appeal to readers' tribal instincts. Relying so heavily on the good graces of social media platforms like Facebook turned out to be a fool's errand. In 2018, when Facebook changed its algorithm, downgrading articles from publishers like BuzzFeed and upgrading posts from friends and family, BuzzFeed took a big hit along with many other publications. It was the publication that relied on affluent, elite, educated millennials that would crack the code for how to truly succeed in the digital era. In 2014, Ezra Klein, a 29-year-old journalist known for his Washington Post articles breaking down the thorny ins and outs of complex government policy, left the Washington Post for Vox, a website whose mission is simple: explain the news. Vox would soon become famous for a style of journalism known as the explainer, an article that takes advantage of the internet's limitless space to give readers the expansive backstory behind whatever news topic is trending that day. If you've never heard of Vox, that's probably because it's not for you. From its inception, the site had a very specific audience in mind: young, affluent, and highly educated. Klein and his co-editors were writing for urban millennials under 35, heading highly educated households that made over $100,000 a year, the New York Times reported. Vox's trademark style would be a cheeky, barely concealed smugness that flatters its readers into believing that by reading the website, which not coincidentally would sustain all of the liberal opinions that young, affluent, educated people already hold, they can rest assured that they are among the ranks of the correct, the informed, rather than one of the stupids. In combining that smugness with a youthful, Whiggish optimism that equates information with progress, Klein figured out how to commodify being in the know in the social media age. After all, the point is not to know things so much as it is to broadcast that you know them. And the folks at Vox realized there was a gold mine to be had if they could turn sharing a Vox article on social media into the method whereby someone signaled their identity, the way a certain kind of person used to walk around with their New Yorker magazine peeking out of her handbag. In other words, Vox capitalized on one of the mainstays of the journalism status revolution, the anxiety members of broader elite classes have about whether they are elite enough. The confusion of having an elite educated status with having information, facts, and knowledge should by now be familiar. It is a move that journalists have made repeatedly to capture a high-end market and then clothe that market-driven decision as a journalistic value. But Vox took things one step further, leaning deeply into the view that reality itself has a liberal bias, one that incidentally appeals to and protects the status of progressive elites. You can see this slippage everywhere in the site's branding. Vox calls its articles explainers, as though these explanations are happening in a political vacuum, instead of confirming the biases of affluent liberals. The Vox gambit was to bet that there were millions of readers like Klein, part of an educated, meritocratic elite who liked intricate policy discussions so long as everything they encountered confirmed their previously held beliefs. But the Vox explainer was designed to appeal to an even smaller set than simply highly educated people. It was designed for people nostalgic for school. The site was visually crafted to evoke a sentimental response to the gear of the nerd. Its main focus was initially going to be Vox cards, explainers that were inspired by the highlighters and index cards that some of us used in school to remember important information, as Klein and the other founders described them in a post introducing the concept of the site. The Vox reader would be thrilled to see the hallmarks of their school days so deployed, thrilled to eat the vegetables or spinach of the news, and be inside the club, as Klein put it, taken there by the bright young editors of Vox who love being in the weeds. The idea of the cards was eventually abandoned for the lengthy explainers that are now Vox's bread and butter, tagged to the news of the day and formatted to pick up Google traffic with techniques like repeating words, listing questions in boldface that people have plugged into search engines, and other tricks of the trade. It was a nimble pivot to sit better athwart the feedback loop between the tools of digital media and the audience they sought to capture. And capture Vox did. In the past 7 years, the site has amassed tens of millions of unique visitors every month. Flush on success, Vox Media, Vox's parent company, has been swallowing up other media companies and publications, most recently New York Magazine, another publication designed to profit off of the class anxieties of the meritocratic elite. In 2015, after raising more than $300 million in funding, including $200 million from NBC Universal, the company was valued at $1 billion. And despite the pandemic woes that afflicted many in the news industry, Vox Media Studios is planning to bring in $100 million in revenue in 2021. Vox has become the reference point for other media companies trying or failing to make it in the digital age. It is the model that everyone else is aspiring to. Recently, the New York Times itself poached Klein. So what's the secret sauce behind Vox? Klein divulges some of it in his book, Why We're Polarized, where he discusses how tracking readers' behavior in real time with digital analytics has turned media companies into purveyors of identity rather than information. As we have seen, the current business model of digital media is less about selling ads, whose online prices could never compete with those of print, than it is about selling reader engagement, which means that the incentive is to produce work that will get shared online, widening its impact in the hopes that it will go viral. We don't just want people to read our work, writes Klein. We want people to spread our work, to be so moved by what we wrote or said that they log on to Facebook and share it with their friends, or head over to Reddit and try to tell the world. The thing is, people don't share articles that don't produce some kind of big emotion within them, he explains. They share loud voices. They share work that moves them, that helps them express to their friends who they are and how they feel. Social platforms are about curating and expressing a public-facing identity, Klein goes on. They're about saying, I'm a person who cares about this, likes that, and loathes this other thing. They're about signaling the groups you belong to and, just as important, the groups you don't belong to. To exemplify his point, Klein lists headlines from BuzzFeed like 53 things only 80s girls can understand and 19 comics only night owls will understand, which Klein sees as evidence of identity media. When you share 38 things only someone who was a scout would know, you're saying you were a scout and you were a serious enough scout to understand the signifiers and experiences that only scouts had, writes Klein. To post that article on Facebook is to make a statement about who you are, who your group is, and, just as important, who is excluded. Vox, of course, is playing the same game, though Klein's articles don't appeal to the identities of night owls or 80s girls. Unstated in Vox's headlines is a quiet appeal to identity, one that does not need to be articulated, but rather is conveyed to you through the topics, tone, and even appearance of the pages on the site, which all coalesce into a whisper in the reader's ear. 8,000 words about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that only a college-educated millennial making more than $100,000 a year can truly understand. And perhaps even quieter, everyone you disagree with is not in this club because they aren't smart enough. Thus, headlines like "Toward a Better Theory of Identity Politics" and "The Radical Idea That Could Shatter the Link Between Emissions and Global Warming" and "How to Solve Climate Change and Make Life More Awesome." It's smug optimism at its best, animating and reinforcing the select nature of elite group belonging, a magic trick that clothes readers' affluence and privilege in a flattering facade of intelligence, information, and data, when in reality the site is just selling readers their own liberal values back to them at a discount. The group that Vox signals that its readers belong to is the group of people going to dinner parties in big coastal cities where they are guaranteed to meet no one who disagrees with them. Vox's explainers are confirmation bias catnip, fodder for happy hour at a Google campus or in the Flatiron district of New York City, for people who leave that happy hour to go home and watch The Daily Show, the mothership of smug privilege masquerading as outrage at injustice. The smugness isn't a bug of Vox, it's one of its main features, a signal that its content belongs on the carefully curated social media page of an urban millennial making northward of $100,000 a year. People have criticized Vox for its left-wing bias, which, coupled with the heavy emphasis on data and explaining, gives the impression that liberal political values are implicitly assumed to be factually correct, one critic suggests. Others point out that for a website focused on information, Vox has published quite a few major errors. But what Vox has done is actually much more interesting and much more common. It has taken a question of class, a certain level of affluence, educational achievement, and discursive style, and sold it as truth, information, data. It sells being informed as belonging to a certain class and having a certain kind of identity, which was created by excluding anyone without a college degree or anyone whom the sight of a highlighter might cause to sweat. And the site has cast these class-based tastes as information, turning wealth itself into the arbiter of what's true and what's false. In this, Vox is not unusual, though it has been unusually successful at what BuzzFeed's Peretti called the Bored at Work network. All those alienated office workers worldwide who had time to kill during the workday while staring at their desktop computers and trying to look busy. Think about it. A day laborer may have time to enjoy one photo of a cat who's having a worse day than he is, but only a college-educated millennial bored at their office job has time for a listicle of 29 cats having a worse day than he is. What Peretti inadvertently exposed was the hidden class story of the national digital media industry. And if BuzzFeed and Vox were once the digital frontier, no less august an institution than the New York Times has made a habit of poaching talent from the two outlets and copying their digital strategy in recent years. As we will see in the next chapter, the Times' pivot to digital was one of the most surprising success stories in the industry, but it wouldn't have been possible without the assistance of one man, Donald Trump.
And that was Chapter 5, A Digital Revolution. Back in a minute. From Bad News by, it is Bataya Unger Sargon. Now, back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.